What if I told you Imu was never meant to be Nika's enemy? Not in the traditional sense, not as a villain, not as an opposite force, but as something far more terrifying, something far more fundamental. Because what if Imu is not a separate being at all, but the shadow Nika himself cast into the world? Because wherever there is light, there must be darkness. Wherever there is freedom, there must be fear. And wherever the sun shines brightest, the shadow becomes deepest. This is not symbolism, this is structural logic, because One Piece has never been about good versus evil. It has always been about freedom versus control, movement versus stagnation, laughter versus fear. And Gear 5 finally exposes this at the highest possible level. Because Luffy is no longer just strong. He is no longer bound by physics, logic, narrative rules, or even reality itself. He bends the world into a cartoon. He rewrites the battlefield. He treats existence like a playground. And that is not just power. That is existential freedom. And here is the problem no one wants to confront. Because absolute freedom does not feel safe. It feels unstable. It feels uncontrollable. It feels like anything could collapse at any moment. And when a world becomes too unpredictable, something always emerges to stop that from happening. Not because it is evil, but because it is afraid. Fear does not want chaos. Fear wants structure. Fear wants permanence. Fear wants systems that never change. And that is exactly what Imu represents. Look at Imu's actions, not emotionally, not morally, but structurally. Because Imu does not conquer nations. Imu erases history. Imu controls narratives. Imu freezes the world into a single eternal shape. Imu does not want movement. Imu wants stillness. And that is not random. That is the direct counterforce to what Nika represents. Nika is movement. Imu is stagnation. Nika is laughter. Imu is silence. Nika is chaos. Imu is order. Nika is white, radiant, absurd, visible, while Imu is a silhouette, hidden, undefined, literally a shadow. Because shadows do not exist on their own. They are created by light. That means Imu is not the opposite of Nika. Imu is the consequence of Nika. And once you see that, the entire story of One Piece reconfigures itself. Because this was never about overthrowing a king. This was about breaking a system that exists to suppress unpredictability itself. Think about it. Gear 5 is not just powerful. It is fundamentally destabilizing. It breaks immersion, it breaks tone, it breaks seriousness, it breaks reality. And that is exactly why the world government is terrified of it. Not because it is strong, but because it is uncontrollable. Strength can be measured, armies can be countered, weapons can be replicated, but chaos cannot be predicted, and systems collapse when they cannot predict. This explains why the world government is obsessed with history control, because memory creates motion, knowledge creates rebellion, and rebellion creates change, and change is the one thing Imu cannot allow. Because if the world moves again, then Nika's influence returns. This reframes the Void Century completely, because what if it was never a war between good and evil, but a war between two existential philosophies, one that believed the world should be free, even if that freedom is terrifying, and one that believed the world must be controlled, even if that control is cruel. And if that is true, then Joy Boy was not just a hero, he was a destabilizer, a being whose existence pushed the world too far toward freedom, too far toward unpredictability, too far toward chaos. And Imu was not created to oppose him, but to stop what he represented from ever returning. Because systems do not hate freedom, they fear it. And fear always creates shadows. And the implications of this chapter are insane. First, it confirms that Imu is not just a political figure, not just a symbolic ruler, but an actual combatant with godlike power. meaning the final conflict of One Piece will not be about defeating the world government. It will be about defeating Imu directly. Second, Loki's devil fruit being an ancient dragon strongly suggests that devil fruits are not just artificial creations, but are connected to real ancient beings, possibly even predating the Void Century itself, which ties directly into the origin of devil fruits and the lost history of the world. Third, Imu's haki is fundamentally different from anything we've seen before. This is not just conquerors. This is not just armament. This is something that feels like it exists to suppress will itself, to erase resistance, which perfectly aligns with Imu's role as the one who erased history. And that tells us something important. The ancient kingdom wasn't just defeated, it was overwritten. And Imu is the embodiment of that overwriting. Fourth, Imu calling Luffy Joy Boy directly means the story is no longer hinting. It is declaring Luffy is Joy Boy, not spiritually, not thematically, literally. And Imu knows it, which means Imu fought Joy Boy in the past, which means this battle is not new. It is a continuation. And finally, Loki standing back up is a direct parallel to what the final war will look like. Not one hero, not one chosen one, but resistance. People standing even when they should be broken. And that is what terrifies Imu the most. Not power, not weapons, not ancient technology, will. This chapter doesn't just escalate the story, it defines the endgame. Because from this point on, One Piece is no longer about pirates versus marines. It is no longer about the One Piece. It is about overthrowing the structure of reality that Imu represents. And Luffy is no longer just chasing a dream. He is walking into a war that started 800 years ago. And this time, it will not be erased. If this theory made sense to you, the next video will blow your mind even more. Tap it now. And don't forget to subscribe, because the final secrets of One Piece are finally being revealed.